right, in this video, we're going to talk about different type of control flows that we have in Python. So there are three main ones that we have. The first one is called sequential control. The next one is selective control. And then the last one is iterative control. And we're going to talk about each one of them throughout the videos that we have. But so far, without knowing it, you have been using the sequential control. With sequential, we know it looks at the order. It's sequential. You look at the first one and second one. The order is important. So part of what Python was doing so far is going to do that is it started from the first line of your code, executed that one, then moved on to the next one, next line, next line, next line, and so on. It just basically going through, and then you notice that if you had any error, it would have stopped right there without continuing. So it's sequential. We always had that sequential control when we wrote our programs. It's going to stay that way throughout the semester and or throughout the whatever code that you are going to write, whatever script that you want to create. And it's going to be embedded in all of the other controls that we have. So even if you're creating a selection control or iterative control, it's going to look at that selection or iterative control sequentially as well. It's going to start from the top, going to the bottom. But you're basically changing the flow of the instructions. So again, up to this point, we always went from the top to the bottom, and it was just going through all of them at once. Just give you an overview of what these two are. The first one, the selection control, is instead of just going from like top of the code to the bottom one, you could have a part that allows you to select one piece of code to run instead of just going through every single thing that you have. So with the selection, you're selecting what you want to be executed. So instead of going through everything again, you selectively telling your program, if certain condition is met, I want you to do this, or I want you to do this. Ignore this one, do this one. So you're basically selecting what needs to be executed. And then the iterative control, the kind of overarching thing about iterative control is you can repeat something over and over and over again. So you start from the top of your code and then you get to this iterative control. So you repeat something, and when you're done with that repetition based on how you define it, it's going to continue with the rest of your code. So you start, repeat, and then continue, right? So we are going to look at all of those type of control structures. And just a quick definition, the control flow is the order of instructions that are executed in a program. A control statement is a statement that determines control flow of a set of instructions. There are three different types that we have. We have sequential, we have selection or conditionals, and then iterative controls that we also call loops. So we are going to, in this video, I'm going to focus on selection control. So a selection control structure is a control statement providing selective execution of instructions. So you're selecting what needs to be executed. The simplest form of selection control that we create with an if statement is having a condition. So you have your keyword if, and you have a condition. And then based on if that condition is true or false, or yes or no, you're going to decide which path you want to take. So if you want to have two paths here, then you have your condition and you have your statement. If it's true, you go through that line and you execute whatever statement that you have. If it's not, you get into the else part of it, to this no part, and then execute whatever statement that you have in there. So it's either the left path or the right path. You cannot go through both. You need to select. So your program is going to select which path is going to take to execute, right? When it comes to selection control, you must pick. You cannot go through all of the options that you have. So you can also have just an if statement, just saying, okay, I have this if, I have a certain condition. If the condition is true, I want you to do something. If not, just skip that whole statement and just move on with the code. right? So you can omit the else part if you want to. All right, so let's go ahead and create this part in our program, which is the simplest type of a selection control. I'm going to focus on the if statement first, and I'm going to add an else part to it, and then we are going to get into different parts, different forms of an if statement later on in other videos. Okay, so let's come back here, and we are going to always start with some headers to make our program to look nice and kind of give information to our users. So this program will demonstrate if statements. Okay, so that is the statement that we have. And I'm going to start with an if statement. So I'm going to say if, and it's going to turn orange because if is a keyword, and as soon as you put it, it's going to turn orange. Now, we are going to have a condition here. So let's talk about how this condition is created. So condition is basically a simple expression, simple statement that you put. And whatever you put here is going to be evaluated to a true or false value, right? Whatever you put here, again, this is very, very important statement. Whatever you put here as your condition, eventually at some point is going to be evaluated to true or false, right? It doesn't matter what you put here, the result is going to be true or false, and then based on that, Python makes a decision if it needs to go through the statements inside your if or not. So to keep it simple, I'm going to just put here if. Let's actually create a variable here. So num equal to 10. So for my statement, I'm going to say if num is greater than 5, I want you to print, just say, I'm going to say num, comma, is greater than 5. Right, so this is our statement that we have here, and I'm just going to leave it like this. A couple of things before I move on. So again, we have our if keyword, we have our condition, and then we call that the header of your if statement. And we always end the header with a colon. So that is the end of that header. That is the end of that condition. So Python knows that you reach the end of your header when you put that colon. Because if you notice, I put this conditions. You can have multiple, like more than one condition in your header. So you can have multiple statement here, separate them however you want, and then it's going to evaluate each one of those expressions and then find the result of all of them and see if it's true or false, right? So for instance, I can say if num is greater than 5 and if num is let's say also greater than 5 and less than 10. So you want to see if the number is between 5 and 10. So if it's greater than 5 and less than 10, then do something. We need to change our statement, but just showing you can have multiple condition in one header. We're going to leave it to greater than 5, just keep it simple. So we have the keyword if, we have one condition, and we ended the header with a colon. And then as soon as you put that colon, press enter, Python is going to automatically put an indentations for you. The indentation in Python is significant. If you omit that indentation, it is not going to run your code. It's going to give you an error message. All of the main blocks that we have in Python, the ones that you use to create different control flows, are going to include the indentations. The indentation means that a statement or statements that you have are part of a selection control or part of iterative control. And it knows exactly what is part of what. So in this case, I have this print function part of my if. If I have something else here, print, I'm going to print this statement end. So this is also part of my if statement. If I delete the indentation, then that end is not part of if, it is going to be outside of it. And we are going to test that and show you how it's going to change the output of your program. So I'm going to start with putting it part of my if statement. I'm going to run this code. I'm going to change the num, and we are going to go about and testing different things. Okay, so let's run this one. So it goes through, it prints our header, and then it's going to say 10 is greater than 5. That is what I had. And then it printed this word end, right? So this is this num, it puts that there. So 10 is greater than 5. If I change it to another value, let's put 6, and if I run this one, then now it's 6. 6 is still greater than 5, so they're all going to be printed. Now, if I change this one to the value 1, 1 is not greater than 5 anymore, so it's going to ignore whatever you have inside your if. It's going to skip all of those statements. It's going to skip these 2 lines, and it's going to move on with the rest of the code. So if this statement print in line 14 is part of the if, and if this statement, if this condition is not true, you never print this part. But if I put it outside of my if I put it outside, then regardless of if this condition is true or false, you are going to execute this line. You're going to run this line because that is part of your main code. This is not dependent on any conditions, right? So because your code is first of all sequential, so start from here, run, it goes through the condition, checks the condition that you have. If it's true, prints the statement. If it's false, skips it, it moves on, and it gets to this part of the code. So start, gets to selection control, decides if it needs to take a path, and then it continues with your code. So if you run it this time, you're going to see that word end, because even though you skipped the statement inside your if statement, but you moved on, you continue with the rest of your code. So that is like the simplest form of if statement that you can have. It's just an if with a condition, some statements inside your if. I'm going to add something here. So instead of just having just manually put the value, we are going to get an input from user, and then we are going to check that input to see if it's greater than 5 or not. So we are going to say, please enter a number. We're going to have this one. So now I'm going to run this one more time, and I'm going to put 10, similar to the first example that we had. And I want you to tell me why the output is going to be different from the first time we ran this code. So the first time that we ran the code and we have the input 10, or hard-coded as 10, we got 10 is greater than 5. I'm going to put 10 as an input value, but the output is going to be slightly different. So this is 10. Here's the result you're going to get. It is saying the error happened, something happened in this line, which is line 12. And you can read it. So type error greater, not supported between instances of a string and an integer. So last time that we had 10, it worked fine. So in this example, we had 10, it worked fine. So what is the difference between this 10 and this 10 that I put as an input, right? So let's go back to our code, or you can pay attention to this message and see if anything sparks in, if you know why we are getting that error message and not a similar output as the first time we ran it. Just putting 10 here. So instead of this one, we had 10. We did not get that error message. So if I run it, it's going to be all good. But as soon as I replace it with an input and I put 10, I'm going to get an error message. It's very different. Why is that happening? All right. So if you remember, when we talked about input function, we said input function always gives you a string type. So what you're doing is you're telling, if I put 10, assume we put 10, you're saying, is string 10 greater than 5? Python cannot compare those two different types of values. One is a string type, one is an integer. You cannot compare them. You cannot apply comparison operator between two different types. If they're numeric data types, yes, you can. But if they're two completely different types, it cannot do that. All right? So how to fix it? Very simple. You just need to change this value to a numeric data type. You can either change it to an integer or a float. So I'm going to convert it to an integer value. So get the value first, then convert it to an integer, then assign it to this variable num, and then compare it to 5, and then same stuff as before. Okay? So running it again, I'm going to put 10, and it should give us the exact same output as the previous one. Because this one is like exactly as saying, if you put 10, is exactly same as saying 10. Right? And you can test it with other values. Now I'm going to test it with 5 or 6 or any other number that you want. So 5, is 5 greater than 5? It is not. So it's going to skip the statement that you have inside an if. And then if you want to test it with some other values, so like -2 is not greater than 5, so it's going to skip that. So you can test it with different values and get the result. So going back to here, what we did so far was we tested this part of if a statement, just one line of this image. So we are going to now add the else part to it. So else part is going to basically cover everything else that you haven't covered in your condition. So if I'm saying, is this number greater than 5? Anything else, if a number is equal to 5 or less than 5, is going to be covered in your else statement automatically. You don't need to put any conditions for else, and you should not. It's going to complain if you put any condition. So in the else, I'm going to say a very similar statement is less or equal to, is less than or equal to 5, right? So now if I run this one, if I put 10, similar to the previous one, I'm going to get the same output. You always check different things when you change your code, change the previous one, make sure you are still getting the same output. And now I'm going to check it for other values. So I'm going to check it for -2. So -2 or -2 is less than or equal to 5. So now it's basically picking one or the other options that you provided. Now you have two options for it, and depending on if that condition is true or false, it's going to pick one of those two. And then we are going to try it with, for the a borderline value, which is 5. Is 5 greater than 5? No, it is not. So it should go to the second part. 5 is less than or equal to 5. Okay, so that basically covers this kind of simple statement that we have. So you have if a condition or conditions, you have some statements in there. And then if you want, you can have an else, and in else you have other statements. And depending on if the condition or conditions that you have are true or false, you're going to pick this path or this path, right? As simple as that. Next time, in the next video, I'm going to talk about different, the other types of selection control, which we call them multi-way selections. So you can use different type of a statement, different type of elifs that allow you to have more than two options, or nested if-else. But for now, in this video, we're going to just focus on this one. All right, so let's go back here, and I want you to try not having indentation. I just want to show you, or want you to practice with omitting the indentation. If you run this one, it's not going to go through. It's not going to run it for you, because it says there is an indentation that is ignored. You don't have that, and I don't understand what is part of this if statement, right? So make sure you truly understand what if statements that you have, what the statements go inside your if, what the statements goes inside your else. Another common problem is, let's say you have this other statement, just another statement here. So we have this one. So you have an if, which checks your condition. You have two statements inside that if, and then you have your else, and then you have another statement inside your else. So if I run this one, it should be fine. It goes through, runs it, put 10, it goes through and prints both the statements inside my if, and then it goes to else, it skips the else, sorry, and gets to this end part. If I run it and put another value, put 2 for instance, it's going to go through the else part of my code because the condition was false, was incorrect, so it jumps into the else. It skips the statements that you have inside your if. One common problem or what common mistakes that students do is they have this they ignore the indentation for the second statement or different statements that they have inside different blocks. So if you do this one, it's going to still stop the code and not run it. Why? Because you have this if and else. Else is not an independent statement. It is connected to an if. So if you have an else, it looks for an if statement for it. Right now, this else does not have any if statement. Why? Because you deleted the indentation. That means this if is done. You finish with this if statement after you took out the indentation. Right? So if you start at the beginning of the left part of your code, that means that if statement completed, you terminated that if, it's completed, you're done with it, and you're starting something else. And then you get to this else part, it's like, okay, where is the if for it? There's nothing in there, you cannot find it, so it's going to stop right there, and it's not going to execute your code. So make sure you understand exactly what goes inside what if or the else part, and then put the indentations in place so the Python understand exactly what to run and what is part of what.